This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Things We Carry from Size for Cause and Bharat FM. Today, I am so excited, and I say this every single week, but I am especially excited this week because I have here my best friend, Tanvi Gurazada, who is brilliant, insightful, incredible. I met her my freshman year of college. We have a very funny story of how we first met, and we've known each other for about 6 years now, maybe 7, I think. And we've grown and learned so much from each other from the comfort of our friendship in the last 6 to 7 years. So a little bit about Tanvi, because I love bragging about Tanvi because she won't do it herself. So Tanvi is currently a master's student at UCSF studying global health. She also works as a project coordinator at UCSF's Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health to evaluate the feasibility and impact of developing alternative methods of accessing medication and abortion. Tanvi is extremely passionate about improving reproductive healthcare access and outcomes for marginalized populations and has a background in family planning and abortion clinical care. Before coming to UCSF, she worked at Planned Parenthood and got a firsthand look at the unnecessary and often insurmountable obstacles that patients face while trying to access care and also reclaim agency over their healthcare decisions and bodies. Tanvi is deeply invested in the effort to secure reproductive justice for all people and is committed to keep working to advance reproductive health. So Tanvi, welcome. I'm so excited to do this with you.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here and do this with you. It's so weird to hear my bio read back to me.
It's an incredible bio. It's amazing. You said to me, and I was just like, yes, I am so proud of you, killing it all the time. And this is going to come out in a much bigger way later, but I feel like you're one of the few people I know whose personal passions and work passions just intersect so beautifully. And you have endless energy and time and care that you place into your work, and you work at it like no one else I know. So I'm so proud of you and happy to be here.
Yay, excited to be here.
Amazing. So Things We Carry is about the rituals, the patterns, the practices, things that we inherit from our families and our communities, and things that we choose to carry on and the things that we choose to completely forego because they don't serve us. And this whole concept is actually just inspired by all the conversations that you and I have, that we have in our group chat with the rest of our friends. We are always talking about this, how, our families mean so well. They pass on so much to us in the hopes of keeping us connected to our roots. But a lot of the time, it's actually not the best and the greatest things about our culture that they end up passing on to us. And we're fortunately, I think, in a place where we get to kind of decide what keeps going forward and what we decide to change. So I think we'll dive first into your background. When did you immigrate here? Where were you born? Tell us everything. When did it start?
Woo! First of all, I just want to say, I love the whole concept of this show. And also, I think it's just we have such a great group chat that we can just create these ideas from it. That's wonderful. So I was born in India. My family for several generations has lived in Mumbai, but we are originally from Andhra. So I was born in Mumbai, and then we moved here when I was 3 years old.
Okay.
But yeah, I think, similar to a lot of other diaspora kids, maintain an extremely strong connection to our families back home, and even that framing, right? We do consider it back home to still be India. And as I've become an adult, I feel like I have been able to develop my own equation with India, which is great. And I just feel really lucky to have that history.
Yeah. How did your parents kind of keep you connected to everything? Was it inspired by them, or did you have your own innate drive to do it? Because in recent years, you have your own relationship with going back to India and your family there and everything.
Yeah, I think when it was younger, it was just like a lot more like, brute rule, like my parents, I mean, as I think very common, were extremely terrified that my sister and I would be like American or too American or whatever. So they always made sure to like really emphasize the things that about our culture and traditions that they wanted to keep alive. So my sister and I were like both forcibly put through Carnatic music, even though I was not a good Carnatic student. And we went to like Balvika. Yeah, we went to like Balvihar and the whole, and my family's very religious, so I think that like spiritual aspect played a huge part in it. But they were just very I guess intentional is a word for it, but out of a sense of fear that they might lose something about, finding an Indian community wherever we went. And, we are very lucky. I grew up in the Bay Area, which is like, I have never known like not being in an Indian centered place. So, so there was that. And but that's as like my childhood.
Yeah, dude, I feel the same way. I grew up in Cerritos, which is lots of Indian people, which I was so lucky to grow up around, to the point where we met at UC Santa Barbara. So when I went to UCSB, and I was meeting, honestly, white people for the first time. I felt like I didn't grow up with them being the majority. And then I went to UCSB and I was like, whoa, wait a second, what's going on here? Like, it was hard to find other brown people. And do you want to tell the people how we met, Tanvi? At UCSB?
You want me to tell the people how we met? Oh my God. I was an RA in one of the residential halls.
What is an RA? Tell the people what an RA is.
Sorry. I was a resident assistant, which is just like a glorified hall monitor. One of these residential halls for freshman college students. So I had like a floor that I was responsible for of 80 students. And it was, lots of thoughts about that whole experience, but allowed me to meet Varshini. One day we were working the front desk and I'm like sitting in this chair and she's standing like right here. And I had never met this girl before. And she's like, I just want to say that you're so pretty. And I just looked at her. I was like, and then I ended the conversation. I think I left the desk. And then later I was like talking to my coworker, other RA friends. I was like, that Varshini girl is crazy.
And I was persistent. I was like, no. I see something here. I think this could be good for the both of us. I think I'm right. Okay, here we are 6 to 7 years later.
So clearly.
Here we are. Yeah. And okay, so the thing that also I want to go back to is you said that your parents like kept things alive and kept things connected for you from like a place of fear, right? And I think that is a very common experience. Like, they're worried. It's almost like a defensive response it's more of a defensive like reaction than it is like an actual response that's like rooted in like, is there a threat here? And I think that's a really difficult way to grow up, because you're like, is this what it's about? Is this what my culture is about? Is it about like restraint? Is it about all of that stuff? Like, what's been your relationship to like control, restraint, and all of that stuff, given that you were raised like that for a while?
Yeah, I think I had to kind of like, it is a little bit like growing up in a pressure cooker, and I definitely did the whole like, as soon as I could leave the house and go to college, I was like, see you, like, I'm just gonna be wild now, because you made me feel like, if I don't know, if I was to put a toe out of line, like I would be like, the whole world would fall apart, right? And also like and now several years removed from college, where I think those were like the peak of my reactionary days, right? Like the problem I really think with raising your children from a place of fear and from a sense of needing to control like what their relationship with Indianness is that it leaves you no room to really like critically analyze what the value of what you're passing on is, right? Like, I think that being an American immigrant is an opportunity to pick and choose, like, what about our culture we want to pass on to our children, because we are removed from an immediate environment where that is the norm. And I don't think that I mean, at least my parents and like that generation of first wave immigrants, right? Like, I don't think that they viewed it as an opportunity so much more as like a threat to their way of life, where it's like, if you really believe whatever, like that the way we raise, that the way, whatever, that our culture is worth preserving, then there should be enough security in that belief that you inspire your children to like question the things that suck and like hold on to the good things. You know, I was raised in an incredibly religious, like, my family is we're Satya Sai devotees, so I was raised like well within that fold. And now, I mean, I'm like almost 26, but now, like, I mean, I had to do a lot of my own work to understand how I wanted all of those pieces of my upbringing to play a role in like who I define myself as, right? Like, if I had just accepted what my parents would have told me, I would have grown up in an incredibly toxic, oppressive framework, which is like not really, I would assume, what they wanted. So I think it's unfortunate that we are so scared to change practices that we end up just like asking for no questions asked. Because the truth is, like, I don't know. I'm very like, then why did we come here? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you want everything to be the same as when we were in India, then why did we come? Like, what is the point?
What is the point? Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think of that, like, we grew up in the Bay, I grew up in Cerritos, hotbeds of like brown communities. And it's like, okay, like, we came here for it to be different, for it to be better. So why did we opt into the exact same social structures and social pressures that we had growing up there? Because I feel grateful that my parents, like, it wasn't so much in my house, but it was like from the community that I felt a ton of pressure to be a certain way. Like, it was things like, okay, I've always been interested in like makeup and clothes and like whatever, right? And that was seen as like, I couldn't be interested in that and interested, or like be smart at the same time. Just things like that. Like, so every other accomplishment that came after that came as like a huge surprise to people for some reason. So it's one of those things, and that's like the most basic example that I can pull out right now, but it's just, we have once again mirrored the exact social structures that you tried to leave India for, and you've implemented it for your kids now, to the point where there is fear if your child wants to pursue something in the arts. Like, it's like, no, there's no security in that. It's like, you came here to give me that security. Like, you didn't come here so that I could be the same doctor that I'd be in India. Or like, if you want to be a doctor, that's cool. You know what I'm trying to say though. And it's like, you came here to give me options, but now I have the options and I'm seeing the options. And you're saying that I can't go after any of those options that you gave me. And that's hard. And like, I don't blame our parents for it, but it's also like, come on, like, now we have to like get with the program, and hopefully it's our generation of these like first gen kids who can like do that for our kids a little bit easier, because it is really difficult. And but like, on a more positive note, what did your parents like teach you about that you feel like you've held on to in a way that you're like, okay, this is definitely something that I want my kids to know? Because I have this like running list in my head, weirdly enough. I don't plan on having kids anytime soon, but I'm like, I would like my kids to know this, or like all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, at least, I think that I'm just so grateful that, you know, I mean, everyone's family is dysfunctional to some level, but it's just funny that this is like not something that was overtly stressed in my household. It's just like the way we are, this like the familiarity with the people that we consider family is so, you know, like people who will show up for you no matter what, like in any crisis. Like, I really love those things. I love that, like, you know, if something happens or someone passes, or even like when my mom would like go to India and it would just be like me and my dad or something and my sister, like the unending stream of food. Like, I just love the ways we show up for each other, right? Like, when we actually do show up for each other. And I just don't think that that is such not a Western concept, right?
It's not.
Hold your community down is not stressed in Western communities. And I'm so appreciative of that. And also, like, I mean, we have lived in the States now for like almost over 22 years, right?
Mhm.
But when I go back to India, like with my mom's family, things are, I mean, they are like, my aunt, she will just introduce me like as her daughter. Like,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
those things, you know, those relationships are permanent and so connected so deeply. And I really appreciate that. And I think that that is something we do really well, like as Indian people.
I agree. And I think our friend group is also, I feel like, very similar to that, in that like that is a priority for all of us. I mean, the four of us, like in this like immediate friend group that we have, we are all very, very different people, like extremely different people to each other. But I feel like we have some core beliefs like that, like you show up for the people and then you take care of them. And your love language is acts of service. So I think it also plays, I think it plays really well into that, because that level of like unquestionable like care that you can depend on, to know that like, okay, even if something goes wrong, like I got you. That is the beauty of the exact same community that does serve to stifle a lot of people, is like, you know, you still get to bank on the fact that people will catch you if you like fall. So I agree. I think that is the best thing. And then going to the other side, I know we kind of touched on this, but like, what do you want to change? I mean, this is going to play, I feel like, into the work that you're doing with like reproductive health and just like women and their bodies and everything. But like, in terms of like the women in your family, which I feel like we talk about this a lot too, what relationship do you want to pass on? Because I think like, yes, there's like the entire community as a whole, but women of different generations, like being under the same roof, being that connected to each other, like their aunts and things like that. What is that relationship like? And like, what do you want to like change going forward? And like, where have the points of contention been?
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, I will disclaimer by saying like, I think in terms of like, gender dynamics, I just really lucked out. Like my parents have never, ever, ever been like the kind of people who restricted my sisters and I's lives or like imagination in any way. Like they've never, ever spoken about that. Like when we think about careers, we have to think about like, you know, I don't know. I just hear like horror stories from my friends, you know, or like people that I know, and about how like they were discouraged from like seeking education further because they would have to get married. Like my parents have never ever introduced that element into our their relationship with me and my sister. And I think that growing up without that was like key to who I am today, right? Like in being able to immediately recognize that like that is unacceptable. I feel like I have such a leg up. So I just, I want to say like I have a lot of privilege in that my parents were never the source of like that kind of oppression, even though the community is rife with it. But what I do, you know, the thing, I mean, as an adult now, right? Like if you'd asked me this when I was 16, I'd be like, we're strict. But, you know, like 10 years later, like I think I really hate is not the right word, but I really just do not like is that we tend to think about relationships and obligations as like birthrights, right? Like people are just supposed to get married because that's what you do when you reach a certain age. And after 3 years of marriage, you're just supposed to have children. And I really reject that kind of thinking. Like I really hope that it is incredibly important that every relationship decision you make, whether a friend or a partner or a child, is an active decision, because those are long-term commitments, right? And like shit is gonna get, sorry to swear, but it's gonna be like, you're gonna hit bad patches. And I never want to be in a relationship where I'm like, oh, this person is just with me because they just thought that like, oh, now we're supposed to get married. Like I never want it to be obligation that is keeping us together, right? Like there should
Yeah.
always be a commitment to each other. And I don't think that happens if you treat marriage and children as just like trains that you can't miss, right? Like, so right now, like my parents aren't really like this, but I think that's because my sister and I are so aggressive that they're a little scared to broach the subject. but like with my aunt specifically, like my aunt and my grandmother on my mom's side, it's very much been like, okay, like when your master's is done, like we're going to start looking to get married. And I'm like, what is that? Like, what is the obsession to just like shove people into relationships that they may not be ready or desire? Like, I would never get that. And I think that it really holds us down, right? Because it totally breeds resentment from generation to generation. And you know, my mom and my aunt had really difficult lives. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but like our mother's generation, they went through a lot of stuff that I'm like, I know I'm not strong enough to go through that. Like, do not suffer that on me.
I fully rebuke it. I reject it. It will not. I will do the opposite of manifesting that into my life. Like I won't allow it. I just won't allow it. I don't. And before you get into this, I don't think going through those things makes you stronger, is like a level you need to unlock. I don't think those things that they went through are things that anyone should go through. Period. Yeah. They're not right for the message.
Exactly. Like there's this energy generationally of like, well, I went through this and it made me like the mother, woman, whatever that I am today, right? Like, and I think that I see this a lot in my work also, which is like obviously very activism related, but this idea that like you need to center your struggle in a push towards justice is something I really want us to divorce from. It's like, what happened to you sucked and you should not have had to go through it. And it does not mean that you should make your children go through it, you know? Absolutely. And on a bigger level, is that why you had kids, so that they could suffer the same things that you suffered? Or like, are we actually trying to get to something better? So I think the things that I push up against is like the staticness and stagnancy of the community, that this desire to not do anything differently because I don't know what. I mean, the pessimist in me wants to say it's because as we give women more options, we know that they will stop choosing like oppressive relationships, and then who will take care of your baby son?
I mean, this is a whole other roast. We can get into it.
We have, and check out some of our earlier content. But just I think that's what I really seek to change, not just in my like personal life, but also through work. Like we have to be intentional about the relationships we choose. And that's especially like having kids or getting married is not something that you should just do because that's what we do in the community.
No, that can't be how it is. And I think, you know, the question you asked about like, is that why you had kids? I don't even think there is the opportunity to have like a why are we having children discussion. Like we are put on such autopilot, and people think that like being that docile and being okay with like just riding that wave of like the expectations, we will, you know, carry you through the rest of your life. You'll be fine. You'll be set up. And it's like, actually, no, because whether you consciously know it or not, subconsciously, all of your body is rebelling against that. And that's when it breeds resentment. And resentment is not just something that goes away with time. Resentment just festers. Like unless it's addressed, it festers. And I think, you know, children who are born into these situations, like unless they're also like challenging themselves to get out of it, they are going to breed the same adults, because the very first example of any relationship that you have is the one between your family members, your parents. Like that is the first relationship. And I know you touched on like people's sons, and I have so many thoughts on brown men in the community. Maybe we should do a follow-up episode on that. Tanvi and I used to have a podcast, Cubby Lit. It's still on the internet. You can go find it. If you really want to just hear what we have to say about a lot of these aunties and their sons specifically. So go check it out. But in all seriousness, that's what breeds even more adults, like so far, like into so many generations of being in a different country that was supposed to make us better somehow by virtue of just being here. Nothing changes because we don't make it change.
Exactly. And I think it's foolish to think that like, you know, that resentment and the sense of like unfulfillment in your life or any of that is contained. Like my big issue is, first of all, my big issue is like the community having a lot of opinions about when people should get married, because I'm dealing with that now, and I'm just like, you don't, and then beyond that, it's like, it never ends, right? Like once you get married, they'll be like, oh, so when are you having kids? Like, can't wait for you to give us a son. And it's like, I mean, now we're at this place where like people will say it as a half joke, but it's not a joke at all. And everyone knows that.
Yeah.
And my thing is like, are you in a position to have a child? Like, it's not, whatever issues you have with yourself, in your relationship, all of that is extremely, like, your child picks up on everything, So it's not a light decision. And I really resent this idea that like we do things because it's the way that it's been done, when it's like the way that it's been done has breeded a lot of problems that we don't talk about. I mean, there's so much stuff that happens in our lives and in our families that we never discuss. And we need to, like, at some point, if we're not going to put a stop to it, at least think more than like 2 minutes about like whether we want to keep perpetuating it. So I think.
Yeah. And I feel strongly about this, of course, in terms of like what you pass on to your children, but because, we've talked about this community structure where it's like the community is so close, like you have like 5 moms essentially. And it's like everyone, even if you didn't ask for this person to be your mother, they're like, I'm like your mother. And it's like, I don't think I asked for that, but like, thank you. I think the issue is that people who aren't your immediate family members will pass it on to other women in the community, to other children that they come across. I have experienced this, and my mom's going to hate that I'm talking about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. But I truly grew up in an environment where I feel like aunties who weren't my mom, who had sons, placed all of their baggage and all of their notions onto me because they didn't have a daughter to place it on. And I was the easiest receptacle. And I don't want to give too much weight to this notion that women are the biggest defenders of the patriarchy, but some women, they definitely hold its hand and carry it on. And like, it's really difficult to get, like, when you're so young, conflicting messages where your parents are saying one thing, but then all these other conflicting messages are coming from like outside of your family. And that's like the community that you have to be a part of, because as much as I would like to stay home all the time and not be exposed to things, you do have to leave your house sometimes. And this is what you get when you leave your house.
Yeah. And to your point, it's not, often I find that it's not that there's definitely, I have experienced aunties who are like defenders of the patriarchy, but a lot of times it's not an intentional defense of what they're doing is like, oh, I went through this, or someone told me this, and now I'm in a position of power. Like, let's start some chaos. And I just want us to get better about examining like why we feel the need to project our own damage onto other people, especially like cross generations, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, and the South Asian community is the first to say to shoot down therapy, to shoot down all this stuff. But honestly, y'all, a little bit of therapy could help you with all of these issues. Yeah. And not to plug this, but Sauce for Cause, which is one of like the organizations that's like making this whole radio show possible, that's the work that they're trying to do regardless of like age or anything. It's like, if you need resources, if you need mental health resources, if you just want to make your life better and have options for yourself, like, there are organizations who will meet you where you are and help you with that. And that's a lot of the work you're doing, which I feel like is a perfect segue into what you do, Tanvi. So you are a grad student at UCSF, which is the #1 school for what you're studying. Am I correct in saying that?
I don't know. Actually, I really don't know.
Okay, I think it's the #1 school. It's UCSF. It's incredible. You're there and you're studying big things. Can you tell me a little bit about like where your interest in like reproductive health and just like agency over your own healthcare and all of that stuff came from?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty related to what we were just talking about, but so I always, I was pre-med for a long time, especially in college, and
RIP.
LOL. But by the time I graduated, I think I found reproductive health at a time where I was really searching for my own place within healthcare, because it became really clear to me by the time I graduated that like this kind of conveyor belt, like if you want to be a doctor, right? Like it is very much like an educational conveyor belt. You just like go to undergrad, study so hard and just like mindlessly, and then get into med school, which is an incredible feat. And then 4 years of med school, X number of years of residency, and then your life begins like somewhere on the horizon, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of security in that because every step is mapped out for you. You know exactly what you have to do. Like, okay, I'm an undergrad. I have to get amazing grades so that I can get to grad school. And there's not a lot of space to ask questions about like, is this the trajectory of the career I want? Because you're just like, I'm just going to like follow this until I become a doctor, and then I'll decide.
Yeah.
But I did not have the luxury of kind of following that conveyor belt. I mean, I totally did not get the grades that I needed to in college. And I think that totally led. So when I graduated, I was like, okay, I'm going to get some work experience in this field and like see what there is for me, and whether med school is something I should still pursue or try to like fix my transcript to get, you know what I'm saying? Like I was like, I need to basically like, I need to triage this situation because it's not currently going to get me to where I was planning to go. So when I graduated, I started looking for kind of clinical jobs, which got me to Planned Parenthood. And it very much appealed to me. I had done a lot of like internship work in college around like shadowing providers and stuff. And like the world of women's health and maternity and like the OB floors had always been what interested me the most. So I knew that was kind of like the realm I was going to. And then I got this job at Planned Parenthood, and I was there for like a year and a half, and easily like the most transformational and just like radically shifted and gave me a new direction. But I think, you know, what I really found and honed in on is that there are a lot of fields in healthcare where people can pretend that medicine occurs in a vacuum, right? Like if you are a cardiologist or a neurologist or something, like you could conceivably live in a world where you're just like, my only job is to treat the illness in front of me. And then like all that matters is like the ailment of this patient. But reproductive health, like absolutely is not like that. Reproductive health is inseparable from the circumstances that bring people to the clinic, right? Like you cannot just treat whatever they're there. Like you cannot, I mean, you could, but like you won't get very far. And it's, so the kind of people that you find in reproductive health are extremely mission driven. They have a very innate understanding of the fact that medicine doesn't occur in a vacuum, that we are extremely invested in making sure that we are furthering the health of the community, specifically the population who needs services that are so politicized and restricted for like dumb reasons. So that totally becomes a part of your care, and you cannot pretend anymore that it's just about science, because it's not. And so that like is what initially drew me in. And then, you know, and then, I mean, every move I made career-wise after that was very repro guided, basically. But that's what drew me to reproductive health, and yeah, that plus this just fundamental belief that we need to allow people to make their own decisions, right? Which goes back to this thing that I'm saying, like, you know, in the world of abortion, we consider like terminating to be a valid option, obviously. And that lends to this, flies in the face of this idea that like once you're pregnant, like it's just something that happens to you. Like life is just something that happens to you, and you cannot, there are some things you shouldn't be able to control, which I deeply reject. And
yes,
totally guides my work. And yeah, but that's what got me into the door, theoretically.
I want to talk to you about your time at Planned Parenthood, because I mean, we were friends then, so I remember you talking about it. But that is like an insane experience. I feel like most people, like you said, the pre-med becoming a doctor pathway is a conveyor belt. Like you do the most like prestigious, most flashy, like most whatever, like internship, fellowship. I don't know what they're called. I'm not anywhere near that field, but I know enough about like brown people, South Asian kids going into that field that I like see this. And I think Planned Parenthood and going into a clinic like that and working on the ground, and like you would go to work and there would be like anti-abortion protesters who were aggressively violent, where like you would have to get escorted from your car to the clinic. And like you said, this specific field, more than any other potentially, is not happening in a vacuum. Like our entire political environment is trying to shut down these rights for women constantly. In 2020, we have clowns like Mitch McConnell making decisions about what women do with their bodies. And it's like, sir, you have many problems, like the condition of your skin and your face. I think we should I think you have many other things to worry about.
Yeah.
I'm really letting loose on this episode. Anyway.
I was just thinking, like, is this how all of her episodes go?
No, just this one. And I think we know why. But yeah, I think especially this field is constantly under attack. Like, this is science. This is medicine. This is not opinion. This is factual. And it's like, it's questioned so often. So working in Planned Parenthood, you said, was transformative or just a transformational experience. What are some of the things that you feel like you really took away from that and you feel like are things like, this needs to be talked about on a larger scale, because you interacted with patients, with people coming to the clinic who maybe couldn't even speak English, who had very complex family histories. And these were all women, and women are already just so marginalized, even in mainstream communities. So like, what was that like?
Yeah, I think it was just, yeah. I mean, I was never, not that I believe this anyway, but very quickly rid of the notion that what we were doing was somehow separate from like social justice work or, you know, the best healthcare that I felt like I provided when I worked at Planned Parenthood was instances where I was able to connect a patient to resources beyond like just the service they came in for, right? And so on a health perspective, I think, like, just speaking about healthcare in general, I think that the really damaging thing about, you know, this system of medical education in this country and how hard it is to get into med school is that it breeds this kind of like robotic approach to healthcare. And it's so dangerous for patients, right? Because patients do not just exist as like platforms for you to get to med school. Like they are the center of the universe in healthcare, and they should be. And a lot of times, like, you don't see that if you do the kind of internships that are designed to get you into med school. Like, you're not pushed to recognize the humanity of the patient that you're treating. So
many times you're not even in contact with them. Like, you're not even speaking to them and like understanding anything about them, I feel like.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I mean, I'm not at all like shitting on doctors at all, because I think that there is a definite need and an irreplaceable value that they provide in healthcare. I'm just saying that, like, I knew right off the bat that, like, I did not want to just flit in and out of a room, like doing a procedure and then dipping. Like, I need to be connected to the patient. I need to, like, you know, and it sounds like I'm centering my own experience, but more, it was just like, I don't just want to be like the person who has the most technical knowledge and nothing else. Like, I want this experience to progress something forward for the patient, right? So I think the biggest things Planned Parenthood taught me, one, is that, like, in no way, we cannot even pretend that healthcare and like politics and social determinants they're like not only connected, but like incredibly impacting of each other. Like, the kind of healthcare you receive is totally determined by social class, economic status, race, gender orientation, sexual orientation, like, and people who are more marginalized. So specifically like Black and brown women of lower income totally get, like, you know, are set up to receive worse healthcare, which is inexcusable. And so that is, I mean, that's like a broad thing that I think anyone who's worked in healthcare for even 10 seconds with their eyes open should be able to note.
And you're like, some people don't have their eyes open, is what you're trying to say.
Like coasting. I don't know. That, and also that, like, specifically about abortion, right? Like, abortion is not something for us to define. Like, every abortion is different and every abortion is valid. And it really rid me of a lot of these like centrist notions about abortion care and abortion access. Like, there's this idea that there's a right reason to have an abortion or a wrong reason. And I just really learned to be like, when you try to define this experience for a population of people, you're actually just like imposing another level of barriers on them, right? Like and I see this still in the field a lot, that in the reproductive health field specifically, like this need to justify the work that we're doing. Where when I was like, we want people who are anti-abortion to be like, no, it's okay. Whereas when I was working at Planned Parenthood, I was like, they don't exist in my world. Like, all I care about is making sure my patients can get the services that they want in a dignified way and safe and affordable and like in the way that they want, right? So I'm not thinking about justifying the work that we do to this outside group of people that hates us. I want us to be like the most radical, compassionate caregivers possible. So it was amazing. It totally like cemented my desire to work in healthcare in this specific field and to, shift away from this idea that I had to be a physician in order to do that. And it also fueled it gave me a lot of experience on all the things that reproductive health has to change going forward. So it was like a very like internally recalibrating experience.
You're so brilliant. I'm so proud of you. Talking to Dristy, who was like a guest that I had on previously. She's Nepali. She is a third-year med student. She was saying so much of the same thing. She's like, I see what my community goes through. A very insular, isolated community that doesn't allow a lot of new concepts to go in. And she's like, all of that informs how I look at being the best physician that I can be. And I think that politics, those social constructs, fully play into it. And I never want to forget that that's where a lot of misconceptions and your first exposure to how you view medicine and what it can do for you they're just like so inextricably linked. So to hear you both talk about this is like just amazing, blows my mind. And you both are going to change so many things about the way this whole field is run. I also want to say, when you were talking about how like Black and brown women of lower incomes like receive the worst healthcare, I would just like to point everyone to the example of Serena Williams, #1 tennis player on this earth, on this rock floating in space, the #1 tennis player. Yeah, she almost died while giving birth because they were not taking her pain seriously. She is Serena Williams, okay? You have a host of doctors ignoring Serena Williams and what she is saying about her body. And she went through so many complications. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't until her husband was like, no, you have to figure this out right now, that they even like, right? It was something like that, I'm pretty sure. So it's like, if Serena Williams can't do it, like, how do you expect somebody who doesn't really have a voice, cannot advocate for themselves, maybe doesn't have English as their first language? Because I mean, like, I'm sure there are people who have come in who you had to have translators for, things like that. How do you expect those people to vouch for themselves and to like get what they need out of this situation, the way we've set up healthcare? Mind-boggling.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, I mean, to your point about, if Serena is going through this, then like what are like normal people experiencing? I mean, I have a countless number of horrifying stories that my patients would tell me. And I think what moved me the most was I think what moved me the most is when we would just meet like a very basic standard of care and our patients would be so grateful because it was so much better than what they had received. I was like, this is so awful. And I no longer work at Planned Parenthood, and there's so many things that I'm like, we could have done this so much better than we did. Like, and so many ways that I think even in trying to do good, we ended up perpetuating harm. And I think that's true of, like every institution that provides care needs to be able to self-reflect on that level. But like, yeah, to work at even just providing what I consider now to be like the basic standard of reproductive care that any person needing should receive, and then get this feedback that we were the only people that had ever listened to this patient, and like they were so grateful to us. I was just like, unbelievable. I don't know.
I'm speechless. So much needs to change, and I mean, I know that we cannot pin all of our hopes on like a changing of the guard for 4 years, but I just truly hope that that this is one area where we stop questioning the validity of women deciding things for themselves, and also like giving just everyone basic access to healthcare. And we've said all of this is connected, like your reason for going into this is so connected to your family and what you've like seen and what you've experienced.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you know from your personal life where you're like, this is going to fully inform like what I want to do in the future, like how these conversations need to be held specific to the South Asian community, what you feel like this group of people like really needs to understand?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I decided to transition into research and, intentionally pursue this master's degree because I wanted research to be a part of my future career, a lot of it is about like making sure that, when you study global health, you hear about the way global health is perceived. I mean, it's like a very colonial institution of research, in that the history of global health was all about how to make like non-Western countries acceptable to a Western standard, right? Like, and it's a very shady past, and we have a lot of work to do to address those things. But one of those examples is this concept of like population health and population like. So basically this idea that like non-Western countries are having way too many babies and we need to work on overpopulation by like implementing family planning measures or whatever, right? And that is something that totally shows up in India. I mean, to date is an issue in the way Indian people in India experience obstetric and reproductive care, is because like Western researchers push this idea that like India's population needed to be controlled. And I'm not saying that like we should we should definitely make sure that Indian women or wherever you are in the diaspora have access to reproductive health care, should they want it. But I think there's something really problematic about, a conglomerate of the richest, most hoarding countries in the world being like, oh, the East is having too many babies. Like, I think that, and that's not something that's analyzed. So
yeah,
thinking about my current career, right? Like when you look at reproductive health research in India, a lot of it is funded by USAID, and which determines like what you can even study. And a lot of the things that are studied is this very like reductive understanding of, oh, Indian women are disenfranchised women who just need like to be rescued with contraception, right? So they like that thinking. I'm not saying that Indian women in India don't have the access that we are accustomed to. I'm just saying that like we cannot talk about it in a way that deprives them of their agency, right? So my drive is more, I consider research to be like an incredibly powerful narrative tool in healthcare, right? Like what we study and the way we talk about what we study totally determines the kind of healthcare that people experience. And I want to push towards the future where we talk about these things, affording Indian people a little more agency. Like I don't want to study like the rate of sex selective abortion as this like, I don't know. I think that there's a level of nuance that we just do not give to these issues, and we keep funding projects that are asking essentially the same questions. So like on that topic, right? Like India has legalized abortion as of 1970. So abortion has been legal up to 20 weeks gestation in India for decades, but India still has like abortion complications are the third highest driver of maternal mortality in India, because a lot of women do not have access to safe care. And it's just like, obviously there's a problem in what we're studying if we haven't been able to solve this. So that's what really, like, from my own life at least, is this thing again, like, we need to actively be questioning the way we talk about things and why we make the decisions we make. And it can't just be like, this is how it is in India, so this is the only thing we can say.
How it is. Like, it's like, why is it the way it is? Like, I think we need to address not just like a symptom of the issue, because there's like something else that comes before even this end result.
And it is deeply problematic and racist, honestly, for like Western and white organizations to be like, this is how it is in non-Western countries. Like, that is something that needs to be like not just questioned, but like done away with. Like, we cannot keep like using the East to talk about how we are progressing more than them, right? Like,
this is like the argument that Edward Said in like Orientalism wrote in his like extremely racist book from like the colonial period in the mid 1900s. He's like, this is how it is. This is how the Orientals are. And then he was talking about all of Asia. And I was like, okay, very bad book. But many people's first introduction into the East, nuts. We could get into that. Different time, different episode. We'll have you back again. Tanvi, also I want to say, like, I feel like this is why our friend group just like gets along so well also, because personally for me, that's a big driver of a lot of things I do, is like, we need to question why we do things the way we do things. Like, that's like the whole crux of this. And on a different level, it's like, if one person can hear what you're saying, like you specifically, or any of the guests that come on here, and just be like, there are options for me, there are different ways to do things that I've done, that I don't need to go through something that I'm currently going through, that is like the biggest win in and of itself, because one person can truly change the trajectory of like generations of people. It's like one person who takes it upon themselves to like be like, no more, thank you, not happening. That saves the suffering of like so many more generations to come. So thank you so much for being here today. This was amazing. This was almost therapeutic. We do this all the time, ladies and gentlemen. We do this like 2 times a week at the very least. Thank you so much for being here today. And I also want to thank Saas for Cause and Bharat FM, as always, for giving us this platform to have conversations like this. I mean, we swore, we talked about politics, we talked about many things that, you know, we were told that you shouldn't talk about, but we talked about them. And I have to thank both our organizations for providing a space where we can have these types of difficult conversations. And as always, if you are in a situation that is abusive, where you feel like you need help, where you need just support and resources, please reach out to Saas for Cause, and they can connect you discreetly with any of the resources that you might need. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, welcome and adab. You are listening to Bharat FM, a one-of-its-kind, multilingual, eclectic provider of entertainment, information and news to Indian Americans. Headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bharat FM airs shows out of Cincinnati, Chicago and Phoenix. We take pleasure in our ability to cater to your bhakti, chusti, sfurti, shakti and masti needs with our audio and visual shows. Check out bharatfm.com for our online program schedule and archives. I'm sure the content will definitely tickle your senses. Tune in via the 24-hour web streaming on bharatfm.com or via the Bharat FM app. More information can be procured at 513-488-5070.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.